I thought it was just a gas bill. But why did it list my husband's name at an address I had never lived in? There was a line of automatic transfers underneath, drawn straight from our joint account, every month, like clockwork. I stood in my kitchen, holding a cold spoon over soup that had long stopped steaming. The room felt the same, but I was no longer part of its story. What if financial infidelity isn't loud or cruel or sudden, just a quiet line on a bank statement you were never shown? Her name was Nancy Caldwell. She was 66, a retired night shift nurse who still folded towels in thirds and whispered prayers while making soup. She lived in a one-story brick house in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. The same one she and her husband Gordon had shared for over 30 years. The garden in the back grew cucumbers and basil. The porch creaked on the left side, where he always leaned when putting on his boots. Gordon Caldwell was a retired accountant, quiet, neat, always first to wash the dishes after dinner. He handled their bills, managed the bank accounts, and reminded her each tax season that everything was taken care of. And she let him, because trust, she believed, was built on giving someone the keys without asking where they were going. Every Wednesday and Saturday. Gordon left the house around 3 in the afternoon. He said he played cards at a bar in Durham with old friends. Nancy never went with him. He said it was a guy thing. She would wave from the kitchen window as he pulled out of the driveway. He always wore the same wool coat. She always thought that meant consistency. One afternoon, she found a parking voucher in his jacket pocket. The address on it didn't match the bar he mentioned. It was a residential building near the woods, some place called Brookhaven Pines. When she asked about it, he smiled softly and said he had parked there to visit a friend who wasn't well. She nodded, and then she let it go. But some thoughts don't leave. They linger like steam on a mirror, faint, but always returning. It was a cold February morning when everything shifted. Gordon left, just as usual, saying he'd be home by 7. Nancy was sorting old tax files when she came across a bank envelope tucked deep in a folder. She opened it, expecting donation slips or heating bills. What she found was a statement titled, "Recurring Transfers." There, listed clearly, was a monthly withdrawal of $1,480. The money came from their joint account. The recipient was Brookhaven Pines leasing office. Nancy sat down. Her hands felt heavier than they should. She flipped to the next page. A copy of a lease agreement slipped out. The signature at the bottom read, Gordon Caldwell. The address was Unit 205B, 15 miles away. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't call him. She simply took the keys, put on her coat, and drove. Brookhaven Pines sat at the edge of a wooded area, quiet, upper middle class, too new for someone like Gordon, who always said granite countertops were too flashy. She climbed the wooden steps to the second floor. The door was slightly ajar. She didn't knock. Inside, the room smelled like vanilla and fresh laundry. A soft radio played music in Spanish. 2 wine glasses sat on the coffee table beside a small bouquet of lilies. Then she saw them. Gordon stood by the kitchen counter, pouring wine into a glass held by a young woman. She was maybe 30, maybe less. Long black hair, deep tan skin, wearing Gordon's cardigan like it belonged to her. She laughed. He touched her wrist. Then he turned, and he saw Nancy. He froze. The woman looked confused. Nancy didn't say a word. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply turned and walked out. No one followed. The drive back was silent. She didn't hear the tires on pavement, didn't remember red lights. She parked in front of her daughter's house and knocked. When the door opened, she stepped in, sat down, and leaned into her daughter's arms. The papers from the bank were still in her coat pocket. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay on the couch, eyes open, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, and in her mind, she replayed the last year, every dinner Gordon had skipped, every vague answer he had given, every hug that felt a little colder. The next morning, she called a lawyer. That's when she learned the name for what had happened: financial infidelity, a betrayal not of touch, but of trust. Not loud, but calculated. Not explosive, but patient and precise. She had been part of a marriage where someone had built another life with her money. She had heard of a cheating husband, but never thought the affair could come with a lease, a deposit, and monthly maintenance fees. It wasn't just infidelity, it was a family betrayal story. One where the lie wasn't whispered in hotel rooms but hidden in bank transfers and signed rental agreements. Nancy gathered every document, the lease, the statements, a log of dates. She didn't want revenge, she wanted clarity. And maybe, somewhere in all this, she wanted her name to mean something again. Not just on bills, not just on envelopes, but in the truth. She had spent years thinking quiet was safety. Now she knew quiet can also be where betrayal grows best. She had always believed that silence was love, that the less she questioned, the more she honored the bond, that letting him handle everything was a sign of loyalty. But the truth had another name. When no boundaries are spoken, the people who cross them do so without guilt. That was the beginning of the end. The betrayal Nancy faced was not loud or violent. It was not something one could point to and say, "This is the moment." It was slow. It was systematic. It was hidden in plain sight, in transactions and absences and carefully folded lies. Gordon had used their shared retirement funds to build a life that excluded her. He had made decisions with their money without her knowledge, and in doing so, stripped her of the financial trust that had taken decades to build. This wasn't just a broken heart. This was a broken structure, a life unraveling from the inside out. But Nancy carried her own mistake too. She had never checked the bank statements, never asked for passwords. She had treated marriage like a shelter, never imagining it could be the place where she would be most exposed. In her desire for peace, she had handed over control. Not once did she realize that silence could be the space where manipulation takes root. It wasn't just about the money, it was about being erased from the equation. She had poured her work, her years, her trust into a life that quietly pushed her out without notice. In legal terms, what Gordon did was clear. He diverted joint marital funds toward a hidden relationship. In personal terms, it was something harder to measure. It was the moment she realized that while she had planned for the two of them to grow old together, he had spent that time designing an exit she never saw coming. This is what makes grey divorce so uniquely painful. It is not just the end of love, it is the collapse of identity built over half a lifetime. At 66, Nancy wasn't simply losing a husband, she was losing the version of her life she thought would carry her through the final decades. The financial damage was measurable: bank records, leases, numbers, but the emotional fallout that would take longer to tally. She had trusted in their history, in the quiet moments they once shared, in the assumption that love, at their age, meant certainty. What she discovered instead was that age does not shield anyone from betrayal. It only makes it more difficult to start over. Still, she chose to face it. She gathered her documents. She spoke to a lawyer. She told the truth in a courtroom built for facts, not feelings. And in doing so, she reclaimed something no judgment could restore: the right to say, "This was not okay." That, in the end, is the hard part about retirement dreams. They are built slowly, over decades of work and sacrifice, but they can be stolen in silence, in one hidden apartment, in one signature, in 1 month's rent paid without your knowledge. And unless you speak up, no one will know they were ever yours. Nancy left Chapel Hill with one suitcase, a folder of legal papers, and a silence that no longer felt like safety. She moved west, back to the quiet hills of Asheville, where a wooden house sat at the end of a gravel road. It was the home where she and her sister had grown up, now weathered and leaning slightly to one side. Her sister had been living alone for years, and when Nancy asked if she could stay for a while, the answer came without hesitation. The adjustment was quiet. The mornings were slow. The kitchen was smaller than hers, but the coffee tasted stronger. They baked cornbread and folded laundry together. They argued about whose turn it was to sweep the porch. There was no need to explain anything. The air itself seemed to know she had been through something that did not need to be spoken. She cancelled the joint account. She opened one in her own name. She re-registered her will, added her sister as emergency contact, and locked her Social Security file. She enrolled in a class at the local library titled Understanding Retirement Finance. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she wanted to understand where her life had been taken and how to take it back. When the court issued its ruling, Gordon was ordered to return a portion of the marital funds used to pay the hidden lease. But she knew what was lost went far beyond that. She knew there were other gifts, other payments, other moments he had funded without her knowledge. The law returned what it could, but it could not count what she had felt. Still, that small victory mattered. It meant someone else saw what had been done. It meant she was no longer just a woman crying in her daughter's living room. She had become a witness to her own story, a story of harm, a story of response. She began writing again. At first, it was in the margins of recipe cards. Then in a notebook she kept by the window. Then, one night, she told her story to a group of older women in a church basement. They passed around tissues. They nodded. No one interrupted. One woman whispered, "That happened to me too." That was when she knew this wasn't just about her. It was about all the women who gave and trusted, who signed papers they never read, who believed that love was something permanent. Financial infidelity is not just about missing money. It is about erasing someone from the decisions that shape their life. Nancy had once disappeared from her own future without even realizing it. Now, she was writing herself back in line by line, account by account. Tonight, she would sleep in the room she once shared with her sister as a girl. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Inside, for the first time in a long time, she felt still and seen.